Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
From First Paw Media, sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company, this is the Dog Driver Show. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert Forto and Parto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to the Dog Driver Show, and I am joined by my co-host KP. We're up here in Alaska. How's it going?
Doing great today. Hope we can get a little bit of snow so we can get on a sled quickly. Otherwise, if this global warming and this weather is going to continue, we're going to probably running with ATVs all the way until end of December. I hope not, I guess.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's been a long time since it's been this warm and this green out, at least since I've been up here since 2010 for sure. Today we have a Siberian musher calling in from New York, the upstate part of New York, sort of near Syracuse and Utica, or Albany should I say. His name is Stephen Davis, and he has focused primarily in the dryland classes, but is looking forward to moving into some other classes as well. Stephen, how's it going today?
Oh, it's going great. We're kind of in the same situation. It's been a very warm, wet fall, and training has been very limited so far this season.
Well, thanks for joining us. Can you, before KP jumps in with some questions, can you tell us a bit about yourself, how long you've been into dog mushing and that sort of thing?
Sure. I'm not from a mushing family, so kind of like a lot of new mushers start out. We started with a rescue and went to a local shelter and wanted a Siberian Husky and got one. And next thing you know, we had another one, and then a Malamute, and I had three. So let's hook them up to a sled. And then it all kind of went, I guess you could say, downhill, uphill from there. So we have a small kennel right now of 25 purebred Siberian Huskies. We do a lot of dryland race and winter limited class races in the Northeast, and we go out to Wisconsin, and we do a lot up in Quebec and Ontario also. Let's see, I've been racing probably I think this is my 11th year of actually racing, so I feel that I'm a very rookie in mushing years as far as the sport goes.
You know, Stephen, I, like you, also got started into dog mushing with Siberians. I started in 1994 with a group of rescues as well, and they still have an interesting place in my heart. I still have three of them in my kennel. KP, didn't you start with Siberians as well?
Yes, absolutely, actually, and that's what's interesting about talking to Stephen. I started in 1987 in France with Siberian Huskies, actually, and we've been talking to many dog drivers last few weeks, and it seems like majority of us, we started somehow with the Siberian Husky background or one of those in our team, and some of us, of course, we switched to Alaskans, Hounds or Eurohounds, and some of us, like Stephen, is maintaining that purebred kennel, which is actually a very competitive class among the years. Stephen, tell me a little bit about your dogs.
Yeah, well, when I first started, I started out doing mid-distance, so I had more of a mid-distance type of Siberian Huskies. And because of the global warming and it's hard to train and actually do mid-distance, I was forced to kind of switch to the limited class. And as I did that, I started looking at more of a racing line type of Siberian Huskies. So most of my kennel now contains a lot of what they call local Bowden. That's really from Sioux and Lee Gilchrist up in Canada. They're kind of some of, their lines. And from Howland Spirits, which is Phil Rue out in Wisconsin. So those are kind of where the back of my main sprint team is from right now. I've done a couple breedings and done a little mixtures of the two and had some success with some of the breedings. And so far, the team seems to be pretty competitive and very happy with the results I've gotten so far.
So, Stephen, again, I'm really familiar with the Siberian, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners, especially folks that are not involved in dog sports, but they're very familiar with the Siberian themselves. How does a racing line Siberian differ from, say, a show line or even a pet line? Can you describe the differences for us?
Well, the racing line, we breed not just for obviously looks like they do for the shows. We're breeding for performance, breeding for, can they really stretch out? How are their legs? I look for a nice tuck in Siberian. I also like to see the size to be more of a medium size, not the big husky size. It seems like almost like the Siberian world is kind of split into two directions. One more of the racing line and one more of kind of the show line. And I'm not sure when that really happened because I'm not actually an expert in far as the history of everything with it. But from my observation, it seems like, this split has happened because some want to see their dogs have certain characteristics that they want to see at the show rings. And then us that are racing and doing the other lines, we breed basically for the performance and not for the looks.
What's interesting, Stephen, is when I started out with the Siberians in the early 90s, I was also doing quite a bit of competition obedience and a little bit of conformation or show dogs. And I remember I would take my racing lines into those show rings, and I would be accosted by the little old ladies with their show Siberians. They would dang near run me out of the show ring because my dogs, they look like mangy mutts compared to their pretty sled dog, their pretty show dogs. Even though they were both Siberians, it was just really interesting to see the difference in the two, and that's even prominent today, isn't it?
I'm not really too much into the show, but from what I see, yes, I would have to agree that it is. What is kind of nice is I know there's up in Ontario, they've been doing some show for the Siberians for the racing line. So they're actually kind of doing something similar, except for they're looking for more of these lines of Siberians and basically giving out, judging them based on how well they can actually perform instead of their color and their looks and stuff like that.
Stephen, for myself, I'm talking about myself. When I started with the Siberians, obviously we didn't know anything about working dogs back then. It was, your pretty Siberian Husky with blue eyes that we fell in love with. And of course, we grabbed a couple of them. And before you know, we have the third one. And now, like you said, we can throw a sled behind him and race him. And very quickly, we learned that there's a big difference between a show Siberian Husky with pretty blue eyes and a lot of nice and furry coat, and a racing Siberian Husky which has more of a conformation and the angulation that they need to have, smaller heads, narrower body. And back then it was Harry Stanlop dogs and Earl Norris dogs, the Anadeers and the Zeros lines that we had in Europe, and we start to kind of switch to those dogs in order to improve our performances. We talk a lot about going faster and using hounds and Eurohounds and greyhounds and desert hounds and pointers. Why would you stay with a Siberian Husky?
Well, my goal is to I'm working on making the Siberian Husky the best breed that I can as far as the racing when it comes to mushing. I really feel that, we are maybe behind the Eurohounds and the Hounds, but the Siberians are getting closer and closer. Some of these racing lines, we are starting to get some pretty close speeds. For example, I just raced at Bristol at the Canadian Championships over the weekend, and in the 6 dog with my purebred team, for 3 miles, we were averaging 18.5 miles an hour, which isn't that far off the leaders. And that's some of the best hound teams in North America or Canada in this part of the country. So I think that the Sibes still can be competitive with the hound teams. It's just, we still got some work to do.
I completely understand. Looking at the teams that we have in Alaska, I know that JP Norris has a Siberian team who runs in the open class. Actually, dogs are running very fast and they're very, very performant. As some of our listeners, they may know, we have actually different classes for purebreds in majority of our bigger races. And these teams, they compete among each other, and some of them are doing very, very fast performances. I believe you just finished organizing a dryland race. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm pretty exhausted today. It was quite the weekend. I hosted the first New York State Dryland Challenge at my place over the weekend, and we got torrential rain on Thursday. In fact, most roads, we were in a state of emergency. Our power went out Friday morning and didn't come back to Sunday night until the race was over. It was pretty difficult, but we kept going, pushed. We had 81 entries, and everything went well. It really wasn't a dryland race. It was a mud fest, but all the dogs and all the mushers had a great time.
Was it just a purebred event, or it was all breeds participating?
No, it was all breeds. In fact, it was ISDRA and IFS sanctioned. So it was all breeds. We had a mixture of registered breed and hounds that were there in pro and sportsmen, just like most of the other IFS races.
Stephen, I asked this question from many of our guests when they are participating in dryland and sled races, how they transition from one mode to the other mode. How do they go from carts or rigs or scooters or bikes to a sled? How does it work for you?
That's a very good question, because my goal is still the sleds, and sometimes I always wonder if dryland is hurting, racing dryland, is good for them or not, because I always worry whether we are going too fast, too soon in the season. But I try to take all my dryland racing it's not racing, it's experience for my team. It gives them exposure to being on the truck, to travel, and to be out in a race type environment. And I use it as basically practice for my sled season, so that way, if I have any issues, I can work them out during the dryland season. So time we are hitting the snow and racing sleds, all those issues have been worked out. And it's also a great opportunity. I had some yearlings this year. I've had them in a couple of races to give them just some racing experience. So that transition is, for me, it really isn't as much of a transition. It's more of a just early fall training, and we just throw some races in it just to get us ready for the snow races.
So earlier you learned about First Paw Coffee Company, and now I'm going to tell you about its Tail Wagger Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Tail Wagger Blend is their first offering, and its name and label were crowdsourced from their Facebook fans. How cool is that? The Tail Wagger Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It is a medium roast from Colombian beans with tastes of Brazil nuts, grapefruit, and oak. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.
So, Stephen, I know that you live in New York, and I know that dog mushing is still pretty prevalent, in particular up in the New England area. What is the public perception of dog mushing in your neck of the woods, and What do you do to propagate that? Are you pretty vocal in your local communities, or are you just putting your head down and doing your own thing?
Well, we have a lot of clubs up here that we try to educate as much as we can. We get into schools and do demonstrations at schools, and the biggest thing is public education. Try to get out there, try to get vocal, let them see that, what this sport is all about. Let them see that the dogs love what we're doing. That's one reason why I wanted to do that event in my place in upstate New York, because they had no clue what dryland racing was, little less, little limited mushing in general. So it really, I think it opened up a lot of eyes in my community, because it became really the talk of the town. We had quite a few spectators come, and they got to see that even though it was a mud mess, these dogs just had a great time. And I think that's a key. It's just to let people see that these dogs love it, and educate and get out there to the community and share our love with them, whether it's through schools, social media, or whatever type of avenue.
So, Stephen, if we could switch back a little bit towards breeding, and we talk a lot about breeding on this show, in particular with genetics, and we've talked to a lot of dog drivers that's been doing this for 40, 50 years, who've been doing it a heck of a long time. But you had mentioned that your goal is to produce the best Siberian that you possibly can with what you have to work with. What are you looking for in the future? How can you change what's already there right now? I know KP had talked about Anadir that goes way back to the 30s with the Norrises and all that. What do you hope to do to the Siberian over the next few generations?
Well, again, it's the nice thing about going to races and other Siberian top, racers. Get to talk to them, take a look at their dogs, look at their genetics and their pedigrees, and just kind of go back and see what kind of combinations work. One thing that, and like I said, I'm very new to this and I'm learning, but I have found out that a lot of mushers seem to always think if they take their best leader and made it with their other best leader, that they think they're going to get this fantastic superstar. And yeah, maybe that's true. That might happen sometimes. But I have found out sometimes looking at that pedigree and looking what's behind that dog might even be more important. So, for example, I did take a combination of a Holland Spirits dog, which still has some local Bowden in the background, and then another dog that's not a superstar. She wasn't really a superstar in harness, but she had the pedigree in the background, and she did go back to the Zero Lines and the Anadirs and stuff. And those puppies that she has produced by combining them right now are the superstars of my kennel. And it wasn't my best leader with my best leader. It was more looking at what was behind them that seemed to make a big improvement in my kennel.
KP, what are your thoughts on that, and what do you think about what Stephen's doing out there?
That's very interesting. Majority of our racers that we talk to, they have the same train of thoughts. Breeding the super dog. It doesn't matter if they're hounds or if they're Alaskan Huskies or English Pointers or Greysters. That's the same goal among all of us. Stephen, I'm going to ask you something very interesting. When we are talking to the racing community, usually, they talk about some of the dogs that are easy keepers and some of our hard keepers. Usually the hard keepers are your Euro hounds or your GSP pure hounds, and the Siberians are considered easy keepers. Tell us a little bit about your diet and what you do for your dogs.
Well, when I first started, I was doing mostly just a good quality kibble. And then I've tried a couple different things. And the last few years, and I've really noticed a big improvement since I've done this, is I do a lot of raw mixed with kibble. So, and actually it ends up being cheaper, because what we do is lots of times grocery stores will have for sale chicken thighs and chicken drums like 39, 49 cents a pound. So I have a local grocery store, when they have those sales, I'll order like 800 pounds of that chicken. I grind it up through this industrial grinder, bone and all, put it, freeze it into basically portions that we're going to feed at night. And I mix that in. And we also buy fatty, like a 70% ground beef, and mix that in, along with a good quality kibble. And then, of course, we add some fish oil. For the sides, I like to add Zinc Pro, because historically it seems like the sides always have a little zinc deficiency. And then I give them a multivitamin, just because we're giving a lot of raw, just to make sure to get all the nutrients they have. And since I started doing that, I really see a big change in their muscles and their development, and in their stools too. You're not picking up more stools than you're putting into them.
Yeah, definitely. In average, how many cups of dog food do you give to your guys?
Of the actual dry dog food, they're probably only getting about a quarter to half a cup.
Okay.
There is not much of the actual kibble. It's mostly raw, and a lot of water that goes with it too.
Of course. Another question is, as we talk about sled dog racing in general, we almost always talk about global warming and what is affecting our races. What do you think the warmer temperature is doing to some of the purebred lines, your Siberians, your Samoyeds, your Malamutes, your Greenland dogs in performance?
Well, first, I think that is global warming is making dry land become a little bit more and more popular, because it's getting harder and harder to have some sled races. As far as the Nordic breed, I've noticed, though, there seems to be not as many of the Nordic breeds competing in dry land, because I think they're concerned about the heat with that type of breed of dog. It seems there are more hounds and stuff, even though that's not necessarily true nowadays, because it is starting to grow and they're starting to see more of the Nordic breed at these events that I go to. But my opinion is, and obviously you don't run the dog when it's too hot, you do everything that you can to make sure you're doing things right. But my guys, if it's warm, they have the intelligence enough, because Siberian Huskies are very smart, to slow down. And I've seen some of these hounds, and I don't mean to say that hounds aren't intelligent, but they are just so hard driving. They will run themselves on a hot day till they collapse. And most sides that I've experienced are smart enough to know, oh, this ain't feeling good, and I slow down. So as far as overheating, a Siberian Husky, I think you really got to push a dog hard and not be a responsible musher to ever really do that.
That is so true. Yeah, speaking of, Siberians are smarter than hounds. Robert and myself, we looked at each other and we both smiled. You are true. They are smarter dogs than the hounds that we are running right now, because our dogs, they are conditioned just to have one speed, which is go. They don't have another speed, so they don't think. They just go. And with the Siberians, I remember from back in the days when we had dogs in the Alps, and if it was warmer temperature, you're right, they would slow down. They would not kill themselves, at the warmer temperature out there. Are you able to reduce the coat on some of the breedings that you're doing? I know that when we did that years ago, some of the dogs coming from Norway, Siberians coming from Norway, in particular, a line out of Zero's Cider, the dog's name was. These Siberians, they had no undercoat almost, very, very short coat, and they would handle the warmer temperature and loss of energy, eliminating the heat easier than the dogs with a bigger fur. Can you do something like that in your breeding?
Well, that's kind of the dogs that I do have that are my racing lines. That is one of the features of them, that do have the much shorter coats than the traditional show dogs. So that's the other thing that I continue to go on, because some of the ones that you mentioned are actually, you go back into the pedigrees and generations before, they're in the lines back there. So most of my dogs are the shorter coats. I don't necessarily, I don't do a ton of breeding, but when we do, I don't always use that as the main factor on to decide whether I'm going to breed, these two together or not. But I do agree. I do see a lot of the faster sprinter, more racier line dogs do have the shorter fur than what you traditionally would think of a Siberian Husky.
Definitely. I'm going to completely change the subject here, and instead of talking about Siberians and dogs in general, asking you about the fact of organizing a dryland race in your background. And how did you come up with this idea, and would you do it again?
I don't know. Ask me in another week if I do it again. I have a property of 30 acres. It's not a lot. I've worked on this trail for years, my own training trails, and it's kind of modeled after, in many ways, of Bristol. If anybody's ever gone to Bristol, it does a lot of zigzag and switchback and stuff. We've had a few little small, fun weekend events with just training with some mushers and stuff, and finally said, "Wait, you know what? We should just put on a dryland race." And I reached out to Pennsylvania Sled Dog Club, which is one of the clubs I'm a member of. Reached out to them, asked if they would be a RGO and be willing to host an event with me, and basically needed my head examined afterwards, and everything fell in place. But yes, we would do it again. It was a great event, and it was just a lot of work, and it wouldn't have been so bad if the weather didn't, put a damper in things. But other than that, I'm sure we'll do it again.
Stephen, you talked about sort of that mud fest, and I think you're exactly right. Up here in Alaska, most of our dryland races have been mud fests, and it seems like that's pretty much how it is all over the world. I was watching some of the race coverages over in Europe this past weekend and one previous, and it looked quite muddy there as well. So it looks like dryland is becoming muddy racing for sure. I know even one of them is called the Dirty Dog Derby, and I think that's because it's just so muddy. So, Stephen, I have time for one final question, and if you've listened to our show, you know what's coming, and it's probably the highlight for folks that listen, and that is, if a person comes up to you and asks for a piece of advice, or just getting involved with the sports, whether they're in purebred sports or want to do Rondy or something in the future, what would you tell them if they ask you for a piece of advice?
Yeah, I've listened to your podcast and listened to many of your interviews, and I do agree with almost everybody has the same answer, is to start out slow, know what you want to do, get a mentor to help you. But I also think that probably a very important thing is you need to join one of your local clubs or organizations. Because by joining them, first of all, you are supporting the sport of dog power sports. And the other thing is, it's going to give you some great connections of people that love the sport and can help you move along as you start out. I don't know of any club that is not going to have open arms and welcome a new musher and help that new musher to reach the potential he or she wants to get to. So I feel that reaching out and joining, there's got to be a local club somewhere is close by, and becoming a paid member to help support that club is very important. And then second, it would even be nice if you could even join maybe an international one like ISDRA or IFS or anything like that too.
Right. Yeah, that's great advice. And our show is pretty much sponsored by our local club, the Chugach Dog Mushers Association, and we do welcome new members all the time. And a lot of folks want to come out there and win the races and do very well, and others just want to have that camaraderie of being part of the club and coming to events, and we welcome both sides for sure. KP, anything in closing?
Stephen, wanted to thank you. Robert, as he mentioned, Chugach Dog Mushers is behind this show, and Robert is the vice president of our club and heavily active in the organization. And I completely agree with you. Joining an organization, assisting, organizing events in the organization is super, super important to our sport. Stephen, thank you one more time for your time. I appreciate the taking time off work and chatting with us in the last 30 minutes or so. I learned a lot about you today and your passion for our sport in general. And wishing you plenty of snow and cooler weather and medals and trophies.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and we'll keep in touch for sure. On behalf of my co-host today, KP, this is Robert for the Dog Driver Show. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company. Learn more at firstpaw.coffee.
From First Paw Media, this is the Dog Driver Show. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you can see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert Forto and Parto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media.